The 2005 House of Wax is a weird movie. It's a remake of the 1953 House of Wax movie starring Vincent Price, which is a remake of the 1933 movie Mystery of the Wax Museum, which is based on a short story by Charles Belden. So House of Wax 2005 has a pretty storied history to completely ignore. House of Wax 2005 is a delirious thrill ride of non-stop ersatz schlock. The cinematography is unhinged. Right from the outset, we get these bizarre, shaky stalker shots that would make you think the context is anything but a group of college kids discussing a road trip. Even a simple kiss shot makes me feel like a lurking voyeur. Jared Padalecki is in this, by the way, and of course he is. It's a trashy 2000s horror movie. They couldn't not invite him. House of Wax is about these evil twins who kill people and turn them into wax statues, using them to make a town-wide wax museum. Passers-by think the town is populated thanks to some Home Alone shenanigans. There's just about nothing that House of Wax isn't trying to be. It's got the counterfeit Leatherface family, we have like 2 minutes of sloppy found footage and a couple of swooping Jaws shots. The sibling motif is hammered in when you see that the Ghost Town's movie theater is screening Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a move about as on the nose as showing a Pauline Kael compendium in a Charlie Kaufman movie. Oh, that happened, didn't it? This movie is absolutely a product of its time. If you got a neural network to spit out the most 2000s movie imaginable, this would be it. A decadent party scene of 20-somethings fooling around, beer and boobs and gore-fest kills, Life is Strange haircuts, MCR on the soundtrack, casual homophobia, characters grappling with internal conflicts that are abandoned like a frozen pizza in the produce section, heroes and villains alike completely free of decision-making skills, just following their stage directions to stand on the next big red X. At the heart of House of Wax is the tension between small towns and big cities. One of the aforementioned irrelevant character conflicts is the main girl planning to leave the South and go to university in New York. Despite that, the main group in general represents the city folk in this dynamic, out of their depth in this strange rural world. Main girl and Jarpad hitch a ride from a local, but they demand to be let out after a couple minutes because they think he's creepy, and he seems genuinely hurt. It really seems for a moment like the movie is trying to humanize this character, challenge stereotypes that city slickers project onto rural folk. But don't worry, at the end it's revealed that the guy is actually the secret third brother of the evil twins. Whew, thank goodness. I feel reaffirmed in my belief that no one outside my metropolitan area can be trusted. Over and over, our protagonists act entitled. They let themselves into the House of Wax and rub their grubby paws everywhere. They interrupt a funeral, which naturally later turns out to be staged. After being invited into a man's house, Jarpad sees fit to just wander around and let himself into whichever room he feels like. But of course his suspicious expedition is merited because that's how he, as well as we the audience, discovers that the house is in fact a murder lair. And for the briefest moment, I was reminded of something. And you may think it's silly, but hear me out for a second. There's this framing of two completely different worlds touching, exploring each other. Two cultures that simply can't understand one another. The big city squad strides into the small town with entitled sway as the small town guys skulk and spy from a distance. The distrust is immediate, and no show of hospitality could prevent the ensuing parade of violence, which will only be halted by the eradication of one side or the other. At a certain point in hearing this story, I can't help but think, I've heard this script before. It's bizarre to behold this micro-narrative of pseudo-xenophobia where the two sides of the culture shock are two groups of people within the same country, the same region. Now I know what you're thinking. I don't think that this movie is some seminal piece of post-colonial cinema, and I sincerely doubt any resemblance is deliberate. I think the transgressions of the visitors are a standard slasher play. See how rude these guys are? Now you don't need to feel bad when they die. I've spoken about this trope more than once, but I am fascinated by the capacity of patriotism-style ideals to rhetorically auto-cannibalize. The way we can get both rural areas are hives of dumb, violent, poor, inbred idiots, and big cities churn out spokespeople for hedonism and modern degeneracy. Two equally short-sighted stances completely at odds with each other. What does it take to make that happen? I'm getting distracted. This always happens to me. me. The weirdest part of House of Wax is that there is thought in it. There is symbolism. It's viciously unsubtle, but it is there. Two of the main characters are twins. The two evil guys are twins. The hero twins are constantly at each other's throats, one of them the perfect good girl and the other deliberately donning the scapegoat trench coat. The evil twins, who are formerly conjoined, one's face in the back of the other's head, are coordinated, but only because one abuses the other, corrupts and manipulates him, speaks in the introjected voice of his mother. And there's this completely on-the-nose moment at the end where the bodies of the evil twins fall into the configuration of their former conjunction, and meanwhile the two good twins, the last survivors, escape through a melting wall of wax in this shot, which is so on the nose that by the end of this sentence I'll have said on the nose 4 times in this video. Anyway, none of that is why I'm making this. This movie is just such a mess of gnarled roots that I needed to get all that off my chest. The reason for this video is one character in particular. There's one woman in the cast who feels a bit off in comparison to everyone else. I at first assumed it was just because her wardrobe is about as questionable as her line delivery.
You know what, I'm gonna go see what Blake's doing. He seems to like that car more than me nowadays.
But then when the credits rolled, oh, that's Paris Hilton. Somebody I haven't thought about in years, the first heel that wasn't a wrestler, the one everyone derided as famous for being famous without offering any substantial commentary on hereditary wealth, the poster child for multi-hyphenate nepotism in that time frame where the commonality of groaning about nepotism hadn't yet been smothered by motivational talks about the power of networking. Hilton was an easy target because she was perceived as both attractive and talentless. She was easy to cast as a Mondrian color shape ideal, a straw-stuffed effigy of all the vapid celebrities who only got famous thanks to their silver spoon. No need to remark on the universal privilege behind most big celebrities, the fact that many of the biggest Hollywood stars only have opportunities thanks to coming from money. They deserve it, you see. They're actually talented, whereas Paris Hilton is clearly untalented. And believe me when I say that she was hated. So much so that one of House of Wax's marketing slogans was "See Paris Die." Yes, the marketers for House of Wax saw fit to capitalize on the hate for Paris Hilton by using the graphic on-screen death of a character played by her as a selling point. Now, it's a decently gory movie. I'm gonna blur out any gore I show, by the way, so don't worry. But most of the kills are about equal in their grisliness. Jarpad's fate is the only one that's substantially more gruesome than the rest. Paris's character finds her boyfriend's body, and there's a cat and mouse sequence that culminates in one of the evil twins throwing a spear through her head somewhat anticlimactically. We could sit here for hours navel-gazing about imagery, but I'd rather not. Now, it's no surprise that her character died. It's a slasher movie, a 2000 slasher movie at that. A slasher movie that's not just by the book, it's by the whole library. The survival of anyone past the top billing is a losing horse. And when there's 2 women in the group, and one of them is the sexy girl archetype, if you've seen a single slasher movie in your life, you know this character isn't making it out. Yet, this foregone character death was a selling point. Now, for the record, it's hard to get a handle on what that marketing campaign actually did for the movie. House of Wax grossed $70 million to its $40 million budget, which is not colossal profit by the standards of big movies, but it's a pretty good gross compared to the distributor's other films of that time. It's really difficult to try and guess how much of that gross is owed to this campaign, though. I couldn't claim that this campaign made the movie successful, and I couldn't claim that the campaign had no impact, because I simply can't find any record that attests to either. The articles about the campaign just harp on the fact that it happened, no remark on what it accomplished. Apparently, the See Paris Die campaign was specifically a reaction to fan outrage at Hilton's casting. That's interesting to me, because something tells me the target audience of this film was not fans of the original. If the integrity of the franchise was put on the line, that happened way before casting calls. So any outrage must have been along the lines of, Paris Hilton should not be in any slasher film, period. Any slasher would be cheapened by her presence. So the PR team said, okay, you're upset that she's in the movie, but at least you'll see her suffer. The implication is you'll like this movie because there's a character played by Paris Hilton who gets murdered gruesomely, And you'll like that because you can fantasize that it's the real Paris Hilton being murdered. And there's so many things about that kind of shock me. For one, it highlights how much has changed in under 20 years, because I could not see this happening in 2022. It also calls to mind the 2000s flavor of celebrity hatedom. I don't like this woman, therefore it would be gratifying to see her violently murdered. And the general lowbrow 7th grade dead baby comedy of it all. The instinctual reaction is, this is kind of messed up, isn't it? Why was it acceptable to play into this, fantasizing about the death of a real person? I take no issue with movie gore and character deaths. I watch plenty of violent movies and I love them. The fact that Hilton's character dies on screen is not something I see as a problem in itself, and I have no love lost for the ultra-rich. I'm actually not particularly fond of them. But there is something about this that makes me feel uncomfortable, and maybe that's not necessarily fair, because we're not talking about a real death here, right? The Rutledge Handbook of Stylistics cites this marketing campaign as an example of semantic deviance. The words don't really mean what they say. Paris isn't dying, her character is, and the campaign itself comes off as a self-aware joke. Lots of movies use celebrities as a selling point, and this time that's flipped around. Don't watch the movie because you like the actor, watch it because you hate her. But it doesn't need to be a real death to warrant feeling uncomfortable about it. If one of your coworkers sat in a cubicle drawing pictures of you being murdered over and over again, it wouldn't be out of the question for you to think that's a little bit, you know? Now, I'm gonna give the benefit of the doubt and assume that the fictionality was part of the sell. This was only seen as pleasurable because it was an imaginary Paris being murdered. You know from the get-go that none of it's real. If she got brutally murdered in real life, you'd have to be really detached to cheer about that. But it's only a symbolic death. So why want a symbolic death for her in the first place? There is something very strange about the general perception of Paris Hilton in the 2000s. In 2007, apparently Guinness World Records called her most overrated celebrity. Calling her overrated is strange when so much of the attention she got appeared to be negative, when the sell for having her in a movie was the catharsis of her character's death. Overexposed, sure, but where does overrated factor into the equation? Some think pieces remark on the See Paris Die campaign and the kill scene as sticking it to the worst parts of contemporary culture. The movie makes a talisman of privilege, inheritance, talentless stars, and celebrity worship and paparazzi bait, and then makes ash of that talisman. You see, with this campaign, the movie was actually playing into a budding societal rejection of celebrity culture. It wasn't about Hilton the individual, it was about the system that produced her. And you know, I gotta ask, if this was such a profound and heavy-hitting strike at everything Hilton represents, would she have been so on board with it? Hilton took the whole thing in stride, even got in on the joke. She posed with signs. She said in a Hollywood.com interview that she liked the kill scene and cheered for her own character's death. That's the thing about Paris Hilton. She was always a businesswoman. She would always make the most of any situation. People hate her? Well, that's an opportunity. All publicity is good publicity. But in spite of that, there is something that feels strange to me about Hilton hate. The pleonastic snag of famous for being famous produces a series of feelings, but it also works some legerdemain, distracts you from the real question behind fame. It just takes as a given that there is a correct reason to be rich and famous, and that those who fulfill the correct reasons are just not at all affected by those factors that make famous for being famous unfair. And likewise, we all ranted about celebrity worship back in the day, but we spoke of it as if the problem was idolatry, as if there would be no problem if we only worshipped the right celebrities, as if you could earn the title of celebrity, as if anyone really deserves everything associated with that. It's so excruciatingly American dream. And this is a multifaceted issue. While I have no respect for billionaires and I resent celebrity worship, class systems, and hereditary status, the way everyone acted toward Hilton just doesn't seem justifiable to me. When her sex tape was leaked, a moment of betrayal and violation and humiliation, the world was deeply unsympathetic toward her. And I'm not gonna play a shell game where Hilton's position of wealth and power justifies misogyny and revenge porn, or prevents me from feeling sympathetic for a victim of that kind of violation. By the same token, I think it's a shell game to claim that See Paris Die was a symbolic potshot at the rich and the privileged, or that it sprouted from attitudes about anything other than her. So there's a lot of nuances to this issue, and I can see what would bring a person to several different stances on the matter. There's something strange about the targeted bloodlust, but it's not lust for real blood. I'm not gonna sit here and cry about how violent movies are evil, but I've never heard of another violent movie explicitly highlighting the actor whose character is the target of violence. The movie is fictional, but it capitalized on hate toward a real person. Some of the hate seems to come from a logical place, but that logic never seemed to be applied anywhere else. You can say that Hilton was hated for her privilege, but the hate slung at her doesn't align with that. It's as if remarking on privilege was the retroactive justification for behavior that was likely rooted in harmful stereotypes. I thoroughly oppose wealth inequality, hoarding, billionaires, the shallow privilege of fame, but those beliefs can't make me laugh at a wealthy woman being violated, and they can't make me fantasize about ways to brutalize a wealthy woman. Yet, despite all that, the hate being a selling point for the movie was something the object of that hate didn't seem to mind. You might be getting an idea of why I take such interest in this. I think that nowadays we've gotten better at remarking on certain celebrity trends. The way we talk about the Kardashians and family YouTubers and big influencers, what I see recently largely puts much more emphasis on discussing privilege and exploitation and what is or isn't appropriate, rather than shallow takes that reflect some nasty biases. I don't know if that necessarily speaks to an actual shift or only to what's visible to me. I can only speak for what I've seen. I don't have a big fancy thesis to go out on this time, but I am really interested to hear your takes on this. I'll link to some articles about the campaign in the description if you want to know more. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. As always, I encourage you to check out my channel or my Twitter at Indigo's Findings. See ya!